friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here today to talk about the pros and cons of both dehydrating and freeze drying, as well as why I personally do not own a freeze dryer. Now, when it comes to purchasing such big, expensive equipment like that, people really need to be able to weigh out the pros and cons and find out what's best for them. Now, if people absolutely love the idea of freeze drying their own foods and they've weighed out the pros and cons and decided it's best for them, then that is what they should do. They should make that investment. However, not everyone can afford to pour that kind of money into equipment like that. Because freeze drying, some people coming in here might not realize there is a big difference between freeze drying and dehydrating. They're not the same thing. Yes, you end up with dried foods at the end, but the final product is different and the process is different and the cost involved is different. So I'm going to go over some of these different points and why I personally have yet to invest in one and don't think that I ever will. I go back and forth quite a bit, but I keep coming back to the fact that to me, it's just not worth that cost and the other things involved in it. But again, it's got to be a matter of choice. And one thing I would never do, and I really hate seeing people do, is making other people feel guilty for not investing in a product that they believe in. The video I'll link that goes hand in hand with this one is the one that I did on the pros and cons of preserving foods of all forms. So that not is just about freeze drying versus dehydrating, but also freezing and canning. And I might have gone over the differences between water bath and pressure canning as well. So they all have their pros and cons. There's not one way to preserve food that is the ultimate only way that it should be done. It's all going to be very much tailored to you. Let me talk about the benefits of freeze drying. So freeze drying, whether it be that you purchase freeze dried foods, which I do some of, or you buy a freeze dryer and do it yourself, one thing I really like about freeze dried foods is that they retain that same flavor that you would get from the fresh food. And they do have a longer shelf life, but only if properly preserved. You can get 10 years more shelf life out of freeze-dried foods as you can dehydrated foods. But in both cases, the shelf life is very long. But in both cases, it also depends on how you're putting it up and where you're storing it. So there's 3 benefits to freeze drying. So it's flavor, shelf life, and then the other one is the nutrient value. Yes, freeze drying of all methods of preservation, I'm not sure if it's better than freezing, but I think it might be pretty much on par with just freezing your foods. It is the best over dehydrating, canning, and so on at preserving the nutrients. But there's also something you need to understand about the nutrient preservation of freeze-dried foods in comparison to dehydrated when you're reading things such as going to a place that sells a freeze dryer or a place that sells freeze-dried foods. Is the comparison they give you between freeze-dried and dehydrated is somewhat exaggerated. It's not that they're not true, it's just you got to understand what they're actually comparing. And what that is, when we're talking about the nutrient values of these foods, what is always being measured first is the vitamin C and then vitamin A. And the reason why these are the 2 vitamins you're going to lose the quickest, and it doesn't matter how you're preserving it. It doesn't even matter if you picked it fresh and let it sit out for a few days. These things, the vitamin C and vitamin A, are going to go quickly. And this is also why if you're preserving, like I have here, some freeze-dried foods like the strawberries, the cheese, the corn, the carrots are dehydrated, but these 3 things are freeze-dried and they're in jars. So if I'm setting this in a place that's getting a lot of heat exposure and light exposure, these are the 2 things that are going to damage the vitamin C and A. So it doesn't matter if it's freeze-dried. If it's not stored in a cool, dark place, you're still going to lose those same nutrients, and they'll be no different than foods that you've canned or dehydrated when it comes to that. And then the other thing to understand, on the opposite end, when they do these comparisons, when they say that dehydrated foods retain only 60% of the nutrient value, again, that's mostly just measuring vitamins A and C, and they're going by the lowest amount possible when they give you that figure. And when I got to doing more research into that, I found that they're comparing that to dehydrating such things at 140 degrees, which is pretty high. I would never dehydrate fruits and vegetables that high. Personally, I never dehydrate anything anymore above 115 degrees. Maybe I might go to 118 for certain vegetables or fruits that take quite a while to dry. But even then, I'm rotating my trays. I'm not allowing something to get over dried. When it comes to drying herbs or more delicate greens like I have here, then usually between 110 and 115, 115 be the very highest, and that's only for herbs that can handle it. More delicate herbs are going to be drying at 110 max. So remember that when you're looking at companies that are selling certain products, they're giving you an extreme difference, which is not always the case. So it's claimed that 97% of the nutrients in freeze-dried foods still remains. But again, that's not even considering all of the nutrients. That's mostly considering the ones that are most likely to be damaged by heat and light. And then when they say 60%, that's going by somebody dehydrating it at a much higher heat than what I would do personally. So I would think that I'm retaining far more nutrient value in my dehydrated foods because I'm using a lower heat. And yes, I'm storing them in glass jars, but they stay in pretty dark places, so I feel pretty safe about that. So that's that on the nutrients. So yes, you will still, regardless, you will still get a higher nutrient retention in freeze-dried foods, but if you do not store them properly, you will lose all that, and it will be no different than your dehydrated foods. Now, here's a couple other things that always turn me off about the freeze dryer. Now, I already mentioned that it is a pretty big investment, not just purchasing it, but in the maintenance. There's far more maintenance involved in having a freeze dryer than having even an electric dehydrator, but there's many other ways to dehydrate your foods, especially herbs. You can simply hang them. If you don't live in a very humid climate, you can simply hang them to dry, and you're going to preserve even more nutrient value in your herbs when doing that, and it costs nothing in energy. But even with an electric dehydrator that I would use on a lot of this stuff, it pulls far less power than a freeze dryer does. And then to top it off, even the smallest freeze drying unit is still going to be bigger and far more noisy than your standard dehydrator that you get if you're going with electric. And then with dehydrating, I have a video of many ways that you can dehydrate. So if you're looking at dehydrating, there's ways that you can do it off-grid that don't require you buying anything fancy to do it. You can just use what you have on hand. You can even use your oven. So I'm going to go ahead and link to that video down below. So now that I've talked about those cons about the freeze dryer as a machine and why I just am not interested in it because of the cost and the maintenance and the noisiness and the size, let's do some other comparisons. And these are going to be things that are going to be very much tailored to the individual choice. So coming back to the flavor. So yes, when you're talking things like pineapple, freeze-dried pineapple, I was so surprised the first time I tasted some freeze-dried pineapple. It was a very weird sensory experience because the flavor was exactly the same as eating a piece of fresh pineapple, yet the texture was totally different because it's very dry and very crispy, and I loved that. However, I have also dehydrated pineapple and love the flavor of that. Even though it was very different in flavor, I love the chewy texture of it, and it had a wonderful flavor. It makes an absolutely delicious snack. And I can't say which one I like better as a snack, the freeze-dried or the dehydrated. But the thing I like about freeze-dried is when it comes to something like that, usually when I'm buying freeze-dried foods or even buying dehydrated foods like the carrots here I bought, it's because it's something I either do not grow enough of, like the carrots. I grow them, but I never get enough. Or it's because it's something I can't grow at all, such as mangoes and pineapple. I can't grow those here. That's why I like to go ahead and purchase these things. I've had people come in and say, well, if as much money as you spend on freeze-dried foods, you could have afforded to buy a freeze dryer by now. Well, I really doubt that. Because again, not everything that I purchase that's dried is freeze dried. In fact, I actually prefer, I've bought freeze dried mushrooms before, but I actually prefer the dried mushrooms over the freeze dried. And I prefer the dried carrots. I'm increasing the amount every year of the amount of strawberries I'm growing. I still like to have some freeze dried strawberries on hand because just like with the pineapple and other things, they're really great for powdering up to use as flavoring and things, whether it be in a bread or in an icing, like I did with the pineapple coconut banana bread that you can see right here, or also like I did with the strawberry banana bread. Now I have a video out on the pineapple one that I'll go ahead and link to down below. And these to me are things that are just special treats, really. I don't do that very often, and I don't just sit around and eat this stuff. They're just saved for adding flavor to things when I want to do something special. Even if it's making a cream pie and I want to get a nice rich flavor like I did with the raspberry cream pie, then I just powder up the freeze-dried raspberries. Even though raspberries grow good here, again, it's still something I like having freeze-dried. But again, only for special things. It would take me years to go through all the raspberries and pineapple that I currently have stored up. So, and that's what it's for. It's for having it there for when times get hard and we just want something special, but I still try to work on increasing the amount of things that I grow. When it comes down to strawberries, I'm going to be using them mostly in a fresh form of whatever I grow. Right now, I'm freezing my strawberries so I can then pull them out to use in whatever, whether it be making a strawberry rhubarb pie or making strawberry applesauce once my apples are ready, as well as those things we just want to eat fresh right off the plant while they're coming in, because that's where you're going to get the most nutrients out of any other way, is to eat the things fresh straight from the plant. Because remember, everything you pick, as soon as it's off the plant, it starts losing nutrients just like that. The fresher the better when it comes to nutrient value. Now when it comes to zucchini, I've actually bought some freeze-dried zucchini to try it. Didn't like it at all. I prefer my own homegrown dehydrated zucchini far more than the freeze-dried stuff, and the same goes with bell peppers. Any of that kind of stuff, I would rather have it either frozen or dehydrated than freeze-dried. But again, that's a matter of choice. Some people may prefer it freeze-dried over dehydrated or frozen. So I'm going to keep saying this. It really comes down to your personal preference when it comes to that. Now, if you like all your food freeze-dried better than dehydrated, then it's probably going to be worth it for you, if you're growing a lot of stuff, to go ahead and invest in a freeze dryer. But as with the pineapple, I don't grow pineapple. So that means when I go to either freeze dry it, if I had one of those, or dehydrate it, I still have to go purchase the pineapple, which is really not very cheap. Even the best deal on pineapple I've ever seen is not very cheap. So I still have to purchase it. I still have to go through all the work of preparing and then the energy use of running the dehydrator or the freeze dryer, which we do have solar. And as long as I'm doing that in the summertime, those things would run on solar. But if I'm doing it in the winter where our solar power is very limited and I have to run it on public power, then I'm using up a lot of energy, especially with a freeze dryer. So the cost per, even if I spent the same amount of money on the freeze-dried stuff over time as I did in investing in a freeze dryer, well, haven't had to actually buy the fresh foods to put up, and I didn't have to do the work that goes into it or the maintenance on the machine or the length of time and power usage a freeze dryer takes in order to prepare that. So for me, it's worth it for me to continue to just purchase and stock up and put away those things that do not grow well for us or do not grow at all. And my favorite company thus far for me personally is Mother Earth Products, and I always have their affiliate link in the description box down below, and when you go through that link you can actually save a percentage on your order. Something else I cannot grow, even though we do have a banana plant now that was given to us by our neighbor. I have no idea how many years it's going to take to actually get bananas, or if we'll ever get any, or how much we'll get. Dehydrated bananas are awesome. I love them for a snack, but they're not going to work the same for making something like a banana pudding or a banana cream pie, and you can get that flavor. So the only reason I'm stocking up on some organic freeze-dried bananas is so I can powder them up and use them to make banana cream pies and so on. So I would recommend, even before investing in a freeze dryer, at least pick a place. One thing I like about Mother Earth products, this is one of the reasons why they're my favorite places, is most places you have to buy number 10 cans. Well, who wants to invest in a number 10 can like I did years ago when I tried the freeze-dried peppers and zucchini and found out I really didn't care for them? Back then I was buying the number 10 cans because that's all I knew was available. Well, with Mother Earth products, they have several sizes that you can buy so that you can at least try a little bit to see if you're even going to like it. Whether it be something that maybe you want to continue purchasing that product, at least you'll know if you're going to like their product, or at least will give you an idea whether or not it's worth it to you to buy a freeze dryer. Do you like the flavor of all these things and how they turn out and the way that you would use them? That would help you to decide when it comes to that. So you should still try buying some first to see if you even like it when it comes to already freeze-dried foods. Some of the other arguments are that people will say, well, I like to freeze-dry my own foods because I know exactly what's going in it. I absolutely understand that. Totally get it. You know whether or not it's organic. Now, Mother Earth products, their organic products constantly sell out. So they're not always available when you go to buy them. Sort of like the corn. Their organic non-GMO corn is sometimes it's hard to get. I love their sweet corn, but I only get the organic non-GMO when it comes to corn. And in fact, all their products are non-GMO, but not all of them are organic. And same thing with strawberries. I'll only buy, when they have the organic strawberries available, I'll only buy them organic. I never buy non-organic strawberries. They're conventionally grown. They're one of the highest, just like bell peppers, in having pesticides and all that in them. But now here's another comparison that might really have say in whether or not you want to purchase freeze-dried foods or buy a freeze dryer, is the amount of space these things take up in storage. Dehydrated foods out of any preservation method take up the least amount of space because dehydrating is removing all the moisture, and as that moisture is coming out, the items are shrinking down. That's also what makes them take much longer to rehydrate, and in a lot of cases they never fully rehydrate, and most of them will not have that same texture they had when they were fresh. Whereas with freeze-dried, they take up the same amount of room as fresh. So I think a lot of people don't realize that. So that means it can take up as much as 8 times more room. So if we're talking zucchini, I can fit about 8 zucchinis in here, dehydrated. But if these were freeze-dried, it would probably take me 8 jars to hold the same amount of dried zucchini as I've got right in here. And that's just some foods. Some you're not going to see as much of a difference in the amount of space they take up, because even some dehydrated foods do not shrivel up as small as zucchini does, because zucchini has a very, very high moisture content. Now, the way freeze drying works is that, and it's a very long process, and in a lot of cases, though some places will say it's faster than dehydrating, some of that depends on the food you're dehydrating and the temperature you're using, but in most cases, freeze drying actually takes longer because what it has to do is freeze the foods first. Now, yes, you can speed up the process by freezing your food in the freezer first and then putting it in the machine, which I think it's not going to save you time. It's going to save you in power usage and wear and tear on your freeze dryer if you choose to do it that way, which I would recommend. Freeze the food first. It has to be frozen first. So if you put it in fresh into your freeze dryer, then it's still going to have to freeze it. And then it works through a process that's called sublimation, where it takes the ice crystals inside the food and converts it directly into a gas. So that is why when you have freeze-dried foods, like as you can see, this corn right here, it's the same size as fresh corn, because when those ice crystals evaporated into a gas, now it's just these freeze-dried things are full of air pockets rather than moisture pockets. So that's the difference, and that is why freeze-dried foods take up as much room as fresh, because they're going to hold their same shape and size for the most part. Some do change a little bit, but for the most part they're going to still hold that same shape and size, thus making them take up far more room. That's why when you buy a number 10 can of a freeze-dried product and you get it in and think, wow, this weighs nothing. Is there anything in here? But really, when it comes right down to it, if I didn't have access to freeze-dried foods that I could purchase anymore, and I never did buy a freeze dryer, which I'm seriously doubting more and more every day that will ever happen, I would be totally fine, because dehydrating serves everything that I really need to do. You know, some of the number one things I need to dehydrate are my herbs, which I personally wouldn't use a freeze dryer for that, though it can be done, and things like zucchini, especially zucchini, because it takes up so much room if you freeze it or can it in any way. And I would much rather dehydrate most of my zucchini so it takes up less room. So most of the things that I'm going to put up in a dried form are going to be dehydrated anyway. And so that serves most of my needs, and I have many different ways to do it, but whether it be with electricity or using my wood stove or whatever other ways are out there. Like I said, check out that video I put if you're interested to learn all the many different methods of dehydrating. And here's something else to remember, is that freeze drying, comparatively speaking, is relatively new, but people for millennia have been dehydrating their own foods of all kinds. Then the last thing I wanted to cover is that the length of storage time on the shelf. Freeze-dried food, from what I could find, has a 25 to 30 year shelf life. However, I think that's a pretty generous figure, considering that would be only if you're keeping your freeze-dried foods in a cool area and completely not exposed to any kind of light. So if you're keeping in the bags like this, or keeping them in the number 10 cans that they came in, or if you are putting them in jars like I have here, you're making sure you're keeping it in a place where it's not getting any light exposure. So that shelf life is in reference more to nutrient value. It doesn't mean that food is not edible though after that point. You could still get calories. You're not going to lose your calories from your food no matter what way you preserve it, and you're not going to lose your protein value. And then dehydrated food, this was the one that surprised me. Dehydrated foods last an average of 15 to 20 years. But again, making sure they're properly preserved, like I always vacuum seal, and keeping in a cool, dark area if you want to retain the most nutrient value in your dehydrated foods, and that goes for canned foods as well. And then I do have videos on vacuum sealing. I'm not going to go through that whole process here, but I'll just explain my favorite way to vacuum seal when I'm doing it in jars is to use my brake bleeder pump with either the Food Saver tops, as you can see here, which the best price you're going to find on those is if you buy them directly from the Food Saver company. If they're out at the time you go, just wait. They will get them back in stock. That's been happening a lot lately, but it's $25 for 2 lids, plus you get an accessory hose, which you may or may not need if you're not using the Food Saver machine. And then I think maybe $5 shipping, so I think $30 you can get both. Or for jars that are not your standard mason jar, if it's a recycled jar like a green olive jar, I will use the vacuum chamber with the brake bleeder pump to vacuum seal my jars that way. So I have more information in that. I'll figure out which video is best when it comes to that, and link to 1, 2, maybe even 3 of those down below so you can learn more. So I think that's it. I think I covered all the points I meant to cover, and I hope you find this helpful. Again, it's not that I'm trying to say whatever you choose, if you choose to buy a freeze dryer, that's just a waste of money. No, it might not be. It might be the perfect choice for you, but for some people, it's not the best choice, and so far, as of yet, I have yet to see it be the best choice for us. And I wanted to get this information out there because I really hate it when people who cannot afford to invest in something like that are made to feel bad because they can't get it, and they might feel desperate like they really should get it. Well, no, not necessarily. So weigh out all the pros and cons and how that fits into your lifestyle, what you're growing, what you need, maybe what you're not growing because you can't even have a garden. All these things are going to come into play. Oh, and also how much this stuff costs when you have to go down to the store and buy it and then bring it home and then put it up yourself. So all these things need to be taken into account. All right, well, go ahead and share your experiences down below, whether it be you have a freeze dryer or you prefer to dehydrate, and what you think of all that. If you love it, if you hate it, whatever, it doesn't matter. Just be polite and kind. Don't try to make anybody feel guilty because they're not doing it the way you do. Just share your own experiences because people want this real life interaction when it comes down to considering making such a big investment as buying a freeze dryer. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.